Would it be valuable to you if you could turn your business into an impactful legacy brand? Like, think about this. I'm talking about a brand that not only stands out, but makes a lasting impression on your industry. Like, hello, how do you think that's going to impact your sales? Like, right? Yeah. So, welcome to this episode. We're going to dive deep into the exact steps that are working right now to position your brand as the only choice. As we're joined today by our special guest, branding expert Noel Powers. Powers, right? Noel
Yes,
Powers.
Noel Powers. Yes.
There's a lot of vowels. Noel Powers. Right?
There are. And I'll tell you something. I'm so into branding that I actually gave myself my own last name. And I'll tell the story. 5 years ago, my whole life exploded. I ended a 15-year marriage. I moved states 3 times in 2 years with my toddler in the back seat. This was all during the COVID shutdowns. So I moved to a new state, opened my laptop in an empty condo, and I found out that my master teacher had died from cancer. And that was a point where it kind of terminated Noel 1.0. And I needed to hit that restart for 2.0. And I just always remember that moment. I felt like I could have completely lost myself to grief, but something amazing happened. I found myself instead. And I found that this lifelong dream I always had to be a global thought leader and a speaker and writing books and doing all of this, the vision of doing it right now came to me. Literally the very things I would need to do that, it all came to me in that moment. So that was my aha moment. And then where the last name Powers came from is I had spent 20 years circling the same word on a page: empowerment, right? The Stephen Covey, assess your personality. Where are your natural aptitudes? And I would always circle the world, this word empowerment. And this time I decided, well, this is going to be my new last name, Powers, because I define empowerment as stepping into the role you were really meant to fulfill.
I love that. Oh my gosh, I'm glad I brought that out of you. That was brilliant.
And
Um,
that's what my personal brand is about. It's about empowering. And so, just like everyone else, I said, if I want to have this powerful brand, I need to ask myself the one question: what is the one impact I'm going to make, right? Of all the things I could do, I need to create one well-defined change. And so I chose visionary leadership because, again, I had studied to become an artist. And the person that I studied with, she was the center of this community. And I said, well, if I could create a community and be the center, and in 20 and 30 years have thousands and millions of people orbiting around me, right, with all this positive change. So what's it going to be? So I chose vision driven profit. And how I really got into it was, first of all, JFK, President John F. Kennedy, he gave the moon speech. That's a visionary leader. That's someone who invented the future with a vision that he shared. And I really looked at what that did to the people. The Bible says that without vision, the people perish. It doesn't matter how much potential you have inside yourself. If you don't have a vision, if it doesn't make you look up and not at it's not about the conditions around you or the resources that are there. If you don't have that elevated goal and that absolute purpose and unity, the raw materials will never come together.
oh my gosh. And I also love, I'm going to amplify this, the fact that you had that intuitive hit and you ran with it. You didn't ignore it. You didn't, just kind of brush it off. You ran with it. You embraced it and you ran. And you created a new name for yourself, which is very common in the industry, actually, having a pen name. There's
Exactly,
nothing wrong with
exactly.
that.
And I told myself, well, I'm going to be right next to Oprah Winfrey, and not to toot my own horn, but I beat her out of some global awards. Noel Powers, Oprah Winfrey. So it turned out I stacked myself right over her by accident. And that's just always my joke, right?
That's funny. Oh my gosh.
You're going to be
That's
a global person. I I beat Oprah on a couple global awards, but not too big of a deal. But then what got me into this idea of visionary leaders creating industry leading brands is I went back and I asked myself about Steve Jobs, a figure I had studied as a business major and as I'm a social sciences person. And I was asked to write this presentation on how he changed society, his impact on us. And I said, well, here this person is. He invented 7 different industries and completely reinvented retail when it could have died entirely. Back when he created the iMac, you couldn't get someone to walk into a computer store if you offered the thing for free. So I really studied him. I said, what was it about him? And so I spent a year and I immersed myself in the world of Steve Jobs and Oprah and Harley Davidson. Why? Because these people had a vision that was so powerful that they literally wove their brands into the fabric of our culture. That's why Harley Davidson is here 120 years later. And I said, what is this? They all had the same traits. And so this was the immersive process, right? Because learning is going to take basically two different approaches. One is immersive, where it's the story, right? How many times in business these days we only get information? And information is not wisdom, it is an action, and it doesn't fulfill one of the main learning methods that human beings, we're always trying to find the missing piece. And so I wrote my book series, Vision Driven Profit. The first one is Steve Jobs and Apple. And by studying how Steve Jobs, he's a 20-year-old kid, barefoot, unshaven hippie, wandering between ashrams and corporate boardrooms. But do you know what the Apple brand started with? 20 people. He sat in his family's garage with $2,000 and he turned to his best friend and said, well, we've been computer geeks our whole life. Let's find 20 of them and let's make an Apple product that just checks everything off the list. And that is the best brand origin story. Your brand does not start with a lot of people. It doesn't start with funding. It starts when you find 10 or 20 people and understand their desires more than anyone in the world. Find a product or a service, or it can be a list. I created a networking calendar this year where I just created a calendar of networking events for 1,000 people to use. Why? Because I didn't have to spend money. I didn't have to ask them, this wasn't marketing research. I just gave them something so valuable that I became indispensable to them. So that's the first step of the brand. And that's what you learn from Steve Jobs and Apple. So I wrote that book series so that you can get lost in the world. And just like me, it literally illuminates this path of this different paradigm. And it's the paradigm of vision-driven profit. So when you're looking to do something that is dramatically successful and achieve something at a level, you have to up-level yourself into a different world that you haven't lived in before. And that's why the paradigm of vision-driven profit is more important than just pieces of information.
That's brilliant. Oh my gosh. Speaking of brand, wow, we jumped into this super hot. So
Yep.
thank you, Noelle, for being
Yes.
here. Um, I'm going to introduce myself because we haven't gotten a chance to do that yet. For those of you listening, welcome to Momentum Maker Podcast. I'm awesome Angie Engstrom, honoring the awesomeness in all of you. And Gitte, why don't you say a few words?
And I'm Gitte Odgaard. And I was supposed to introduce you, Noel, but I think you've done a great job of that, so I'm not going to do it. I'm just
No
going to give
problem.
you one more welcome and say we're so thrilled to have you here today. Thank
Thank
you for
you.
joining us, Noel.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so great to be here. Okay, so we talked about getting this kind of global concept of what is visionary leadership and what does it look like to walk on a path of literally inventing the future and inviting millions of people to follow you. Now let's talk about the practical steps. This is where I come in as a business coach. I have 20 years of experience in the top personal development and business training circuits. That's back when you had to travel to teach and travel to learn. So during the middle of COVID, I decided to be the global thought leader on vision driven profit. I gave myself a 6-month goal to become that global expert, and I did it in 4 months by just learning and up leveling to be the kind of business person I wanted. So there's being the expert, and then there is learning about what is a brand now? How do you build your business in the current climate? How do you meet your customer where they are in their mind? Maybe it's in Facebook groups, maybe it's by creating a webinar, but you have to get yourself fully current to do that. And then now that I said, okay, so the founders of Apple and Amazon and Harley Davidson, they all share these leadership traits. They're all visionary leaders. So I said, now how do I take this paradigm and how do I turn it into action steps for you? What I want you to get out of it is I want you to take 3 steps and know what to do to create an industry leading brand. Again, this is about mastering, I call them the human elements of leadership and influence. This is not about how to get $1 million in funding or how to get everyone on Facebook to like you. This is about universal energy. This is the universal energy of how to connect with people at a visceral level so that they will follow you, so that they will pay you more when your competitor makes something cheaper, faster, or more shiny in the moment. And these 3 steps, I call it the VMC, vision, message, and culture, is the 3 things you should focus on. Because it's really hard when you're here, let's say you have a successful startup and you say, I want an industry leading brand, or I want to be the #1 brand in my market. Now, what do you focus on? How do you get that focus and consistency to do that? And I do this in 3 steps that are proven to work by all of the industry leaders I have studied and in 500 different industries. So I know it's going to work for you. Let's dive in. Step number 1 is you need to clarify your long-term vision. You need to think 20 years out. If you could make one impact, what would it be? And then you need to pick one person. Who am I going to serve? So you have one person and one impact. Again, because if you can't influence one group of the same type of person, you're not going to be able to market to the mass market. You have to perfect your message to one group of people. And so it starts with 10 or 20 people. Who are the people you understand better than anyone? And how do you have that direct interaction with them? And when you focus long term, it gives you this charisma. I am going here, who wants to go with me? And another thing is, it took most of these brands 10 years to create that position where they could totally dominate. So you need time as an ingredient for your success. And it's the short-term thinking that will kill your brand. You might think it's something else, the market, the economy, but it is, if you cannot broadcast your mind into the future. And if you've ever studied wealth patterns, the people who can't think past 2 weeks never live on more than a paycheck. People who can't live more than 3 years out can never go into senior management, right? Billionaires think in terms of decades, like 20 years out. So this first thing is changing your mindset from short-term gratification to long-term vision and strategy. Does that making sense on your guys' side?
That's fantastic. Yeah. And
Yeah,
it's it for someone that's never heard this before, they're probably thinking, "Oh my gosh, how on earth do you do that?" 'Cause
that's right.
it it
But
is.
it's
It's
an
a
exercise. It's an
yes.
expansive exercise because the larger the vision, the more people are involved, the more. And so a lot of people don't understand that You need charisma to have a brand because a brand is a visceral connection between real people. Your brand is not your business. Your business is a vehicle to deliver on the promise that your brand makes. And this is emotional. The problem with business is people approach it as an intellectual discipline. Now, you need that. But if you don't have a brand, it's very hard to take a business and turn it into a brand. It's a lot easier to have a brand and then create a business around it. So what I'm telling you today is whether if you're a solopreneur or the CEO of the largest corporation or an influencer, what we're talking about are universal principles of leadership and following. And you need to have the charisma to get people to like you and follow you. And the easiest way to do that is just to have a vision for other people. You don't have to change your personality. You don't have to wear different clothes. You don't have to get a degree from Harvard. I'm getting the nods. You know what I mean? It is not about that at all. What you really need is to get to that point where you have a clear vision. Now, you may not be thinking 20 years out, but what I mean is you need to change your mindset to think long term because if you don't plan the future in 20 years, your business may have no place in it.
I like how and I've heard this before in terms of brand, because there's always that, talk out there like what comes first. I like how you
Yes.
frame that the brand comes first, then you can put any kind of business and product and service inside of that brand.
That's
I've
right. And
heard that
you
before
you could
too.
pay someone else to run your whole company.
Right.
So for me, being an entrepreneur is not running a company, it's making a change. People rely on you to lead them through the tension of change. Without entrepreneurs, we'd all be living in a cave. The wheels would still be squares.
So true.
Because someone says, I know this is going to be uncomfortable, but we're going to do this. And now I'm going to walk you through the 1 year that changed business forever. And that's when Steve Jobs went back to Apple in 1997. And Apple was going bankrupt. He had 1 year to take a bankrupt company, revive it, and his long-term vision was, to change the world. He says, I'm going to improve the lives of millions by empowering them with easy to use technology. So he set that long-term vision. And what he did, so what does vision look like in a company? It means that there's alignment in values from the top to the bottom. And it starts with the top leadership. So he interviewed the corporate bozos at top, threw most of them out because they didn't have a vision for the company to lead it with. And then he went all the way down. He interviewed every person in the company and made sure they were enrolled and engaged, right? A lot of people go, how do you create engagement, right? Well, people have to be aligned. So in business, a lot of times people shuffle. Oh, what should we do? They shuffle back and forth. So vision is about total alignment and calibration. Now this flows into the second part. Step 2 is creating a message. And a message is not something that you pay a marketing agency for. It's not something, you don't get it from ChatGPT. Your message comes from inside of you, right? You create this visceral connection. So for Steve Jobs, it was Think Different. And that was the most successful ad campaign of all time. Why? It's because it gave him a way to express what was closest to his heart. Every person in that company, they asked Tim Cook, why did you do this? Why did you join a failing company? You're this great CEO. And he says, comes down to 7 words. He really wanted to change the world. That's why he went in with Steve Jobs. And 10 years after they were almost completely bankrupt, they become the world's most profitable brand. And that's in all of history. So he created this message. And for you, I want you to be really focused on activities. Your message should be a philosophy. If you stepped away from your business for a few days or a week, or maybe the next time you're on vacation, what are 3 words that describe the philosophy? How do you approach your brand, right? What's that one feeling you want people to have? because a brand is the feeling that someone has. And then this is going to flow into culture. Now, culture is what really kills most brands. So most people create culture by default. They have the things they're used to. And business culture is not very positive overall. People leave corporate America because the culture stinks. And then they create companies and their culture stinks too, because they just don't quite understand that culture is creating these inputs that are going to create certain results. And in the case of Apple, let me show you exactly what Steve Jobs did. In his two companies previous, he created his own dream teams. He handpicked people to innovate. And people go, well, what is innovation? Well, innovation is a culture that you create with people who are allowed to experiment. They're allowed to risk. They're allowed to think totally outside of the box. They're allowed to tell Steve Jobs the week before the Apple Store opens that your whole configuration is wrong. And then he listens to it. So you have to create a culture of innovation, because if you don't innovate constantly, you're just setting yourself up to be behind. And just to emphasize this, this was 12 people. So the 12 people that Steve Jobs brought together when he was running out of money, when he was part of companies no one even knew, Apple hired him on and he brought them with him. And these people who, he hired, completely insignificant nobodies, right? He paid them with his own money. He didn't make money. He didn't make profit on his two companies for 10 years. But this is how important culture is. Then Apple bought these companies. And there's this 5-year period where they innovated so much that that group of 12 people created 5 different industries in 5 years. Right, that was culture, and it takes time to develop, and you have to look really carefully. What's the outcome here? What are the results? And how do we promote innovation in a synergistic way and structure our company so that it actually happens? It's not just a buzzword.
Oh my gosh.
Now, I'm just gonna say I really love your enthusiasm. It's amazing, Noel. I was gonna ask you now, how would you sort of translate the facades Steve Jobs had to a solopreneur?
Absolutely. So so again, a brand means that you're creating culture. And so to create a culture, you have to think about what are the traits of the individuals. I'm so glad you asked that question, because I'm a solopreneur. And what makes me a global thought leader is I'm creating culture. For instance, this is a really good way to do it. I wrote the 10 Commandments of Visionary Leadership, right? We invent the future in 20 years. We don't ask for approval, applause, or permission. Right. And so I created my 10 commandments. Why? Because it's a rubric. It shows the way. It's my way of asking people. I'll send them an email or I'll post it. And that's my way of saying, do you feel me? Are we listening to the same music? Right. It is. So I'm creating culture, because if a person does not believe in the 10 commandments I show them, if it doesn't get that visceral response from them, it means they're not part of my tribe or brand. It means that they can go on to the next person. So, right, that's me creating culture on purpose, because I've just asked someone to raise their hand. Do you believe in what I'm saying, or are you going to part ways? And so I'm an individual creating culture, and we all have the power to do that. It just takes focus. It says I stand for these things. And if it elicits a strong response with people, they want to work with you.
Hmm.
Yeah, as you're
So,
explaining that, and you mentioned Harley a few times. Um,
Absolutely.
I love studying Harley's brand because
They're the coolest.
it really is. So for those of you listening out there, that's something.
Exactly. And if you and I want to tell you, a great way to understand Harley Davidson is watching Harley and the Davidsons. It's a show, is short, sweet, phenomenal. But Arthur Davidson, said that this is about culture, not business.
Oh.
He says this is about creating culture because Harley Davidson's, they were the underdogs and they fought the unscrupulous industry giants. And again, they started with $2,000 in the garage and they created that culture again, over and over again. And they were so good at creating culture that all three times when they were going to go bankrupt, they resurrected themselves because of social relevance. So there was nothing special. There's nothing, they're not bulletproof. It just, I just created this three-step process that I use in my, I have a 12-week shakedown where I share this three-step process because you need those prompts. How do you identify these traits in yourself? How do you very quickly summarize, it's things you've been feeling probably your whole life, or it's inspirational notes, but you don't know how to bring it all together. So this is the practical side of it. And that's why I say it's three things, because most people, they don't have the focus. They literally don't know what to focus on to go from maybe a successful startup or their company is up and running and everything is great, but they know that something is just missing. And that shows them exactly what to focus on and take them through the processes of how. And this is where we get into now, you still have a business, you need public relations, you need to really make sure that you have the structure and organization to deliver on your brand product, right? So there are parts of this, I call it the brand power pyramid. There are those legs of the pyramid that you have to build up. And I do walk you through how, because it's very important. But on a podcast, I just want to talk about what. Build that foundation, because that's something you can start doing this week with whatever size organization or whatever kind of business you have. Doesn't matter.
And that foundation meaning those three steps.
That's right. That's the foundation. Absolutely. Because if you don't build a solid foundation, it always falls.
And
Everything. And we see that in business. Your business is going to fail because you become socially irrelevant.
yeah,
That's the real problem. We can't control everything, but when you have these things in place, you can create the conditions to weather every storm,
tell me
right? You
number
don't
two again.
control
It was vision. What were the three? Vision,
vision, message, and culture. That if
message, and
you
culture.
define them and they work together, then you have social relevance. And you do that with a small group of people, and everyone can do that if you're willing to do it, if you're willing to stick to it. And the last 10 commandment of visionary leadership is that you have to give yourself time to prove yourself right.
Gotcha.
You have to give yourself the ingredient, including time, that if you believe you're right, that you stick with it. You're not looking for someone else to give you permission to do what you're going to do. This is leadership that you're going to do, and you're going to do it no matter what. And why not have the steps?
Shouting words. Oh
Put
my
it two
gosh.
together.
Noel, like, woo. Bringing it today. Love it. Power. There's a reason your last name is Powers. I love this. Oh my gosh. This is fantastic. Okay, so what would be a common mistake that you see people making when they're trying to even just getting that foundation piece in place?
Oh, it's just not having a focus. And so my biggest piece of advice is that you only focus on three things at once, because you can only ever have two or three priorities. And then you need coaching. If you want to be an industry leading brand, there are some things you can only learn from industry leaders. So don't have the goal of having this amazing, profitable brand and follow people who don't have one. That's the number one thing, because you're just going to replicate the success of the people you study. And that's why you want to, read the book, Vision Driven Profit, because if you don't change the paradigm that you're operating from, you always get the same results, right? And so the biggest mistake is that you spread your focus so thin that you can't do anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you always want to say, what are two or three steps they're going to get me from here to here? And that's why coaching is still so important, because everyone bottlenecks. And the most reliable way to improve is to get a coach because they've already been where you want to go. And so the second mistake is trying to do everything alone. I'm sorry, but is there like some kind of prize for succeeding in business alone? I just haven't seen it, you know, the prize that you get for succeeding or failing all by yourself. Successful people, and this is why I love the story of Steve Jobs. When he was 20 years old, there was this I call it the Apple marketing pantheon. They took him under wing and they helped him create the Apple brand. At age 21, right, he had the vision and they said, this only comes around once every 10 years. This is the ticket. But then they taught him. So you have to have your own pantheon. Go out and find them. Find them on LinkedIn. Talk to them. I want to shadow you. So the second thing I tell people is you need a hero. When you wake up in the morning, you need to say, I want to be like Coach Noel. I want to be more like Steve Jobs because you will mold yourself into the characteristics that you need.
Yeah, and that's powerful. That's powerful. The power of our mind to be able to, like you said, study the people that you admire, the people that you want to be more like, and then put those traits in you. Like there's ways to embed that in yourself and then act
That's
on
right.
it.
That's right. And they say that 80% of leadership might be imitation.
I believe
So
that.
are you following someone who believes in unlocking human potential, or are you following someone who just runs a business and it's going to run out of steam eventually? You either inspire or expire. So when you have your vision and it's really clear, it's like this fuel. It's like this food. It keeps you going. It is both a goal and the road you're going to travel to get there. One of the problems is that like a business is like a car. you know, your car is not the destination. Your car is a vehicle. Your vision is the destination and very much the path that you're going to follow. And I always want for you, the listener, to have that path just illuminated in front of you. Because that is not just running a business that's more profitable, but that is you fulfilling the larger purpose of what inspired you in the first place.
So important to have that vision and to hold on to it and never let go. And, like if you're in a vehicle driving on the road and you
That's right.
stop for every pothole or
That's right. So the third mistake is looking for off ramps. If
Mm,
you look for off ramps, you're never going to reach your destination. And that's why I say if you want to be an industry leading brand and really make a difference, you need your determination. What are you going to accomplish no matter what? Right? And your car might be broken down. Who knows? You might change cars, but you're going to keep going. Yeah,
you're
you're
gonna
going to, yeah.
yeah, build the bridge, hop on the plane, like get an
Yeah,
Uber, whatever you got to
exactly.
do,
You're going
you're
to
gonna
keep
get
going.
there.
So there is no B option. Now, that allows you to take the energy out of indecision, out of the doubt and the second guessing, and say everything else, I will try strategies, I will try tactics, but no amount of failure is the light switch going off. It is just experience. And Steve Jobs says part of vision is that you get to look back and connect the dots and see how it all worked out for you. And just to talk a little bit about the difference in what people achieve as industry leaders versus the competitors. So the Apple brand, when they created like the iMac and a lot of those early phases of the I for the individual, they only sold to 5% of the market and made 90% of the profits. And they lead that today. That's why they became the first $1 trillion brand in history, doubled that the next year, right? And to this day, they make 90% of the profits in smartphones. And so when I talk about concentrating your brand power, it is both social and profits, because this is one of my taglines: profit follows human impact. The greater the impact that you make over years, it might be next year, it could be in 5 years, it could be in 10 or 15. I don't know that. But what I can say is that when you are in that position and you know how to increase the impact and the profit that you make, right? That's empowerment. That's something that I want you to have now that you didn't have at the beginning of the episode.
Power. Oh my gosh, I love it. I remember, yeah, and again you mentioned Oprah too. You know, her brand's powerful. And I remember an interview where she was in the early years when they were just creating the show.
Yes,
It was all a new thing, and there were like I think 100 other shows popped up during that time. And she
exactly.
told her team, you know, like we can't turn around, you know, and look to see what everybody else is
No,
doing. We're going to lose
no,
sight of where we're going. And she just, you
that's
know,
exactly what it
blinders
is.
on. Don't worry about, you know, the 100 other companies that popped up very similar to yours. Just stay focused. I
That's
remember.
right. And and that is one of the secrets. You need to be customer obsessed.
Mm,
Industry leading brands are relentless
my favorite
about
word,
anticipating,
relentless.
relentless about pursuing, anticipating dissatisfaction, moving to the next level, giving them the next installment. And Oprah Winfrey definitely had the biggest vision. So that's how she actually created her production company. She could have just been another Geraldo or someone making $1 million and doing their shtick, but instead she became the world's best recognized and most trusted entrepreneur. Like, everyone in the world knows who Oprah Winfrey is. Because again, she said, no, I had this vision. She said, I stood there at 5 years old wearing a potato sack, with no shoes on my feet. And I said, I just know that there's more than what's in front of me. And she talks about having her own vision for her life. And she said, in television, she says, I used to be okay with just being on TV. Like, I thought it was really cool, and hit the buttons yourself. But then she says, then there was this vision, and she says, I'm now going to create everything with intention. And so I really love it. She says, now I'm going to make intentional television. And you probably just put a quarter in me and I can go on and on and on. But she says, now I have intentional television, and I'm going to give the audience something they can't get anywhere else, right? She says, I know that everyone in my audience is the same. They want to achieve their highest, truest potential as human beings. And she said, I'm going to give them one piece of transformation every single time they log into my show. And so, right, it was that vision. And she says, well, what is it today? And she had 20,000 guests on her show. But, right, she kept attuned to that, and she never lost track, because again, she could have fallen off the air. She could, people, it goes up and down. Not Oprah, though. No, she really stuck to it, and all she did was get better at it. So, oh, Oprah.
Yeah, another one, a great brand to study. That's awesome. Oh my gosh. All right, Gitte, you want to wrap us up with the last
Yeah, I
comment?
was gonna wrap it up. Just gonna say, Oprah, she really knew how to stick to that vision, that future
She did.
vision. Just
She
like we
did.
started talking about in the beginning, Noel. So this
Awesome.
has been so inspiring. And I just wanted to ask you, is there one quick actionable tip that our listeners out there can just implement pretty quickly if they want to, yeah,
Absolutely.
work on their
Absolutely.
brand? Yeah.
If you could only do one thing today, it's to pick one person, right? Pick one person. Who do you want to serve? And what's the one impact you want to make in their life? Because if you ask yourself that one question and you find a way to answer it, the rest of your brand becomes so much easier, because you've chosen one person to focus on. And now you're using the power of your own mind to go about making that one person delighted
Okay, so focus on one person. Great, great takeaway. Thank you. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Noel.
Yeah.
Are,
Go ahead and
are
wrap
we
us up,
wrapping
Gitte.
this up? Yeah, okay. Once again, thank you for joining us, Noel. It's been such a pleasure. I'm Gitte Odgaard.
And I'm awesome, Angie Engstrom. Again, honoring the awesomeness in all of you. And once again, Noel Powers. I love it, Powers. Thank you for bringing that word to the table today. Thanks for joining us. Brilliant, brilliant share.
Thank
So
you.
many nuggets today. So as we wrap this up, if you happen to be, so here's our person, if you happen to be a current or future homeschooler, looking into ideas to make your homeschool dream financially viable, grab the Homeschool Income Finder, and that's going to help guide you to discover what you can get paid for. As a homeschooler, you can get paid. It's a simple step-by-step guide to uncover your unique monetizable skills so that you can build a sustainable income and homeschool all at the same time. And you can get that by going to Elite Virtual Stages or elitevirtualstages.com/income finder. And once again, thank you for listening to Momentum Maker podcast. Keep your momentum, keep moving forward. And once again, thank you, Noel, for joining us today.
Thank you.